What I want to talk about is what critical thinking means. We talk at Denison about critical thinking a lot. Actually, this video we just saw said that was part of what went on at the TED Talks. You know, it's part of our mission statement, and it seems like a significant thing for students to learn in a university, critical thinking, but we don't actually talk that much about what critical thinking actually is and what it involves. I'll start by just saying what I think it is, my own view of it. And it's well stated in a button that people used to wear back in the old days when people wore lots of buttons. I think I used to wear the button myself. And that's what it said. Question authority. I had trouble at one point because a student said to me, does that mean you're a question authority, like you're an expert on questions? No, that's not what it means. It means what you're supposed to do is to question authority. The lesson of critical thinking is never believe anybody, especially people who are in authority, people who tell you that they know the truth. I think the most important thing to learn in college actually is not to believe them. Not to believe your parents, not to believe your teachers, not to believe your textbooks, not to believe the president of the university, and not to believe the president of the United States. Not to believe any authority. Not that everything they say is false, but whatever they say, you have to take the attitude, is this right? Do you have reasons for it? What's your explanation of it? If there's some counter arguments I could offer, what are those counter arguments? You have to take that critical attitude towards whatever people tell you, towards whatever authorities tell you. I think that's the most important kind of lesson that one would get from learning how to do critical thinking. But there's something particularly important that has to do with the foremost authority that you have to learn how to question. And the foremost authority you have to learn how to question is yourself. You walk into any situation already believing all sorts of things. And the most important thing to learn, I think, as a matter of critical thinking is to learn that I might not be right, that my views might be incorrect, and to take that really seriously. That's a really hard lesson to learn. So I'm going to talk tonight, actually, about a particular philosopher, Karl Popper, who has written about this issue and who had a great deal of influence on me. That's why I'm talking about it. I'm going to talk about some of his ideas. He was born in Vienna in 1902. He lived in Austria until the 1930s when he had to leave when the Nazis came in. He was Jewish, and then he ended up living the rest of his life in Great Britain. He was knighted, actually. He was Sir Karl Popper. And he wrote a book called Conjectures and Refutations, which I'm going to talk about an essay from that book. And he talks about science. He's interested in the question of what science is and what makes a theory a scientific theory. And the first thing I want to say, and this doesn't even come out of Popper, although he says it too, is science doesn't ever prove anything. This is a really important fact. Students sometimes will come in and say, well, you know, science has proven that the Earth is round, or science has proven that the law of gravity is true, or something like that. Science doesn't ever prove anything. And this is not just a sort of vague thing to say. This is in principle true about scientific claims. Scientific claims have the form that everything has some particular characteristic. For instance, William Harvey in the 17th century, 16th century, figured out that blood circulates in human beings. Now, when he says blood circulates in human beings, he doesn't just mean that the particular human beings he looked at had blood circulating in them. He means all human beings have blood circulating in them. This is very important. It wouldn't be a very interesting claim if it was just about the ones he looked at. Because any doctor, when the patient walks into the room, has to be able, never having checked the patient before, has to be able to know that this human being has a circulatory system. So when you make a scientific claim, like all human beings have circulatory systems, you're inevitably making a claim that goes beyond the particular cases you've looked at. Right? But if you're going beyond the particular cases you've looked at, then you can't really be sure that the claim is right. You might assert that a certain thing is true of all cases, but unless the number of cases is really small. I mean, the example I was thinking of was all members of the US Supreme Court have Ivy League degrees. So there are only 8 of them. You could check this by checking all 8 of them. But with any reasonably large number, you never can check every one. Right? You can never be certain that every single human being has a circulatory system, absolutely certain of it. You can never be certain. Think of Newton's law of gravity, which says that any two objects in the universe attract each other with a force that's directly proportional to the product of their masses and indirectly proportional to the square of the distance between them. This is a claim about every 2 objects in the entire universe. How many did Newton look at, right? Some around here at a particular moment in time, but we assume that this is true for the entire universe for all of time. We explain the Big Bang in terms of this law. We don't have any kind of absolute proof of it. We simply think that it's true based on actually our faith in something like, well, it's true around here, and when things are true around here, they're probably true in the rest of the universe too. But the question of how we know that is a hard one to answer. So science doesn't prove anything. But I want to say something else about it, which is that if you've got a theory about the world, in order to prove it, like this fact about gravity or about human beings having circulatory systems, you have to look at all those different cases, basically infinitely many cases, in order to prove the theory. But to disprove a theory, it's very easy, right? As soon as you have one case that goes against the theory, then you know the theory's false. Right? So if you want to say something like, all presidents of the United States have been born on the continent of North America, you could look at lots of cases. You look at the first one, you could look at the second one, you could look at the third one, but only by the time you got to the 44th one, would you discover actually that the theory is false. It's false because of the single case, the single counterexample of Obama, who was not born in Kenya, but who was born in Hawaii. So it takes one case to disprove a generalization, whereas proving it is very hard. That's an important kind of logical fact that's in the background of what Popper wants to say. So Popper asks the question, what makes a theory a scientific theory? And the first thing he points out is that to call a theory a scientific theory is not the same as calling it true. There are plenty of scientific theories that are false. The most famous one is Newton's physics, which was discovered in the 20th century after Einstein's theories, that it's not actually true. I don't know if those of you who are like in first year of physics, I'm sorry for the spoiler, but like at the end, after they teach you all this stuff, they say, oh, by the way, that's not right. I mean, literally, that's what goes on. So a scientific theory can be false, and furthermore, a non-scientific, an unscientific, a pseudo-scientific theory can make all sorts of true predictions. Right? To take the example of astrology, astrology is not a scientific theory. It's not because the things it says don't turn out to be true. It's sort of because the things it says turn out to be true too easily. Right? So I once was checking what's my horoscope, and it says something like, "You will receive news from afar." And that, I went to the office that day, I opened up my email, right? And I got, my friend in Portland, Oregon sent me something, and I'm on some listserv that I get information from Europe about conferences. And so it turned out to be true, right? So true theories that make true predictions can be non-scientific. That's an important point as well. Popper talks about two different theories that were very much in the air in the 1920s in Vienna, where he was living. And one was Marxism. And he says that he was struck, his friends who were Marxists were able to explain everything that happened, and it was a period of a lot of political ferment in Austria and Germany and other places in Europe. Everything that happened politically, they found ways to explain it. They could explain it in terms of their Marxist theory of the world. It was fabulous how easily they could explain everything. He said a Marxist could not open the newspaper in the morning without finding confirmations of his theory on every page, both in terms of what was written in the newspaper, also what was not written in the newspaper because of the class interest of the newspaper editors. And then Popper said, they thought this was a great strength of their theory, but in fact, it was a weakness. I think that's a really, actually interesting remark. The ability to explain everything might be a weakness of a theory. He compares this to Einstein's theory, which had been recently developed, and which is still very much in debate and in discussion. And he talks about a famous experiment. I'll just describe it very quickly. This guy named Arthur Eddington, in 1919. It was a consequence of Einstein's theory that light traveling from a star or something that passes by a very massive object like the sun would bend. Actually Newton's theory, there was also a little bending, but there's a lot of bending in the Newtonian, in the Einsteinian theory. So this guy, the trouble is you can't see stars near the sun for kind of obvious reasons, kind of the same reason I can't see anything right now. But if the sun is in eclipse, then you'd be able to do it. So this guy Eddington in 1919 went and had an expedition to, I think, West Africa, and observed an eclipse of the sun and discovered that the bending of the star's light was exactly the way that Einstein had predicted. this was enormous, this was a big deal. It was front page news all over the world. Einstein's theory has been proven by this test. Now, well, let me wait before I get to that. So the point is that actually Einstein's theory wasn't proven. In terms of what we were just saying before about the impossibility of science proving things, it wasn't proven. There might have been other reasons why the light was bent. Newton's theory was disproven. That's what happened with that experiment. But of course, there's also at that point some reason to start to think that Einstein's theory might be a better one. And the reason is that this prediction about the bending of the light was a risky prediction. It was something that no one would have expected would happen. And Einstein's theory involves saying something that you'd expect would happen, the non-bending or the not much bending of the light, that's not going to happen. Einstein's theory could have failed. If the experiment had ended up differently, if the observations were different, it would have failed. And Popper decided that this is what's important in terms of making a theory scientific. It's easy to find confirmations for your theory. If you look for them, like the way astrology does, if you look for them, it's easy to find them. You can always make the theory as vague as possible and kind of interpret whatever happens to make the theory work. Confirmations are only important if you've made a risky prediction, and then that turned out to work. Every good theory forbids something to happen, says, as in the Einsteinian case, that this small bending of the light won't occur. A theory which is not refutable by any conceivable event is non-scientific. And that's really what was the case with the Marxists, right? Whatever happened, they were going to be able to explain it. A genuine test of a theory is an attempt to falsify it. What you ought to do with your theory, and I'm not just talking about science, I'm talking about you and me and just the world. When you've got a view about the world, you should be trying to falsify it, trying to refute it. Because if you can refute it, then you've learned something. You learn that it was wrong, and you can replace it by a better theory. If all you're trying to do is to confirm it, it's always going to work, and you're not going to get anywhere with it. The criterion of the scientific status of a theory is its falsifiability. There has to be something that you can specify ahead of time that would cause you to say, I give up this theory. You have to be willing to give up the theory and look for ways to refute it. He distinguishes between what he calls a dogmatic attitude and a critical attitude. The dogmatic attitude is familiar. We all have it. We love our theories. We want them to be true. We look for confirmations of them. Whenever something that goes a little wrong with them, we try to reinterpret things in order to make it, no, actually, that didn't refute my theory. I really want to hold my theory. The better attitude is the critical one. It recognizes that theories are often wrong, probably wrong, and looks for refutations of them, looks for their weakest point and tries to test them. And if you've looked for the weakest point of your theory and tried to test it and it succeeded, it survived the test, then you've got a reason to say to yourself, not that my theory's been proven, but that I tried as hard as I could to refute it and I couldn't. And for the time being, I'm going to tentatively hold it, although I know I'm not positive and can't be positive that it's true. So now I want to talk about Donald Trump. But I'm not going to say what I think you think I'm going to say. I'm not going to say that he's an example of a dogmatic attitude, that he and his supporters don't take a kind of critical attitude towards their ideas, that they're always looking to confirm their theories, and so forth. Although I believe all those things I just said about him and his supporters. What I want to talk about is us. And by us, I don't know, I can't even see who's in the room right now, but I suspect that most of the people in this room have the same view about Trump that I do, which is that he's a bad guy and a dangerous guy and a bad president, and we're pretty unhappy about him being president, and we're concerned about the bad things he's doing. I suspect most people in this room feel that way. And actually what I have to say is going to work in both directions, whichever way you feel. But I'm just talking about that myself. There's this phenomenon that's been talked about of sort of the bubble. I mean, it is the case that I don't think I know anyone, certainly no one well who I'm sure voted for Trump. Almost everyone I know, didn't, and has the same ideas about Trump that I do. And the conversations I have at Slater and in the dinner parties I go to and the conversations I have with my friends and in the philosophy department and even with most of my students, we all agree. And on my Facebook page all the time, it's filled with confirmations of my view about Trump. That's what we give to each other all the time. We cannot open the newspaper every morning without finding confirmations of our view about Trump and about the meaning of his election. And we might think that's the strength of our view, but I actually think it's a weakness. I think what we ought to be doing, and I sort of tried this as an experiment in the days after the election, or weeks after the election, after I got myself off the floor, but is to think, what would falsify our views about Trump? What would falsify the fear that, say, I felt about his election? Under what conditions would I decide I was wrong? And if you supported Trump, then under what conditions would you decide that you were wrong, that what we have to say about Trump is right, for instance? I think that's a really interesting exercise. I posed it for people on my Facebook page and also in some listservs I'm on. People found it incredibly difficult to do this, to specify what would cause them. At least one person said, nothing could possibly happen that would cause me to change my mind about Trump. It's like, that's bad that nothing could possibly happen. You've got to admit the possibility that you're wrong. So I actually invite you to think about the question. Actually, if you'd like to, email me, Vogel@denison.edu, because I'm trying to keep a list of this. I'm quite serious about this. What would lead you to change your views about Trump, no matter what those views are at the moment? I think it's a really important exercise to think about. These are some answers I got. They're good answers. I have my own list. I think some of those are on my list. But I want to point out one more thing, just before I end about that. Our views, and again, I'm talking to those of us who think he's a bad guy, have already been falsified, right? We thought he was impossible. We thought he would never get the Republican nomination. We thought he would lose the election. Our views have been falsified. Have we modified them after the election? I don't know. Here's some other things where's the other list? Man, it's missing. Some of the suggestions I got were things like, if the Affordable Care Act is not repealed. Well, it hasn't been repealed. If Social Security and Medicare are not gutted, well, he's proposed a budget that says that there should be no changes in them. If Hillary Clinton is not put in jail, locked up, that's not happening. So some of our expectations about Trump have already been falsified, and I think it's worth noticing that and paying attention to it. So what's critical thinking? It's knowing that you might be wrong and remembering that all the time. It's always considering the possibility that you're wrong. It's looking for refutations of your views and not just looking for confirmations of them, and being prepared to change your views if things happen to refute them. It's holding on to your unrefuted, which just means not yet refuted views, tentatively and fallibilistically. And therefore, it involves always not being sure and living with the uncertainty of not being sure. And recognizing that you don't know the truth for sure and no one else does either. That's what I have to say. Thank you.